Hello and welcome to the CX Files for June 4th, 2026. My name's Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan in Montreal. Mark, great to catch up and great to finally be getting a little bit of sunshine. I'm looking outside today and I feel I can actually walk out without a coat on. It's amazing to think that we're in June and we're at that point, but hey, you take what you can get.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've got to get 6 months into the year before you can stop wearing a coat.
Yeah, this is it. It never used to be like this. I remember the heady days of 2000, 2002, 2003, where you could walk out your front door in the middle of April and comfortably wear a pair of shorts and a t-shirt.
Those were the good old days.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
So
Well,
this
look,
week
this,
we've got one of your guests this week, haven't we?
yeah,
So why don't
yeah,
you give an intro?
you bet. So we have got the one and only Dave Rickard, who is with Everest Group. Now, I wanted to catch up with Dave to talk a little bit about his visit to Ethiopia. He attended the Elevate Africa conference that was put on in March, and one of the reasons I always like talking to Dave is that he comes from a classic analyst background. Dave will give you an impartial view. He will give you the pros, he'll give you the cons, he'll give you the pluses, he'll give you the minuses. But as somebody who got their career working as a market analyst, I really appreciate objectivity. And Dave was able to come to the table with, I think, a very clear and direct line of sight in terms of where Ethiopia sits right now as it relates to CX delivery and outsourcing delivery. The reality is, Mark, that Africa, emerging Africa, so all the points, say, between Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia, all the way through to South Africa, have had varying degrees of hype around them over the course of the past 20, 25 years. We've talked on this podcast to people that have been doing work in different African countries, and in many cases, I think blazing a trail in regards to setting those locations up as viable locations where you can deliver for Western Europe, North America, some of the more established demand markets in Asia Pacific, etc. Dave was, I think, able to give a concise view about where he sees opportunity in Ethiopia, as well as what some of the challenges might be for those trying to get the CX and the BPO industry off the ground there.
I mean, I think it's great. We've certainly been talking quite a bit about different African destinations in the last few months. And I remember following all the LinkedIn coverage of the Elevate conference from Ethiopia, and some of it was stunning. I mean, looking at some of
Yeah.
the facilities and the people that were there, I mean, this is clearly where it's clearly like the next wave of evolution in BPO and CX. Not just Ethiopia, but I think that it's really interesting. Some of the discussions we've had recently about places like Kenya as well and Rwanda. So there's certainly a lot going on, and in the longer term, you will also see this kind of demographic advantage as well, in that Africa's really got a massive demographic advantage in that it's very young.
Yeah.
If you look at most European countries, they're aging dramatically, and this is happening in Asia as well. So I think that if you want to go somewhere that's dynamic, that's innovative, and full of younger, smart people, then these places are definitely going to be the right places to explore.
Provided that provided that things are managed properly, provided that the right policies are in place to facilitate foreign investment, that the right policies are in place to ensure a high standard, a high level of education that's going to be receptive and responsive to the needs of consumers, I would tend to agree. One of the things I think I've noticed about a lot of the hype around emerging Africa is that much of it is promotional based. So it's either
Mm.
by organizations that have a vested interest in seeing these industries grow, and that's great. We all support the growth of industries in Africa, or it's by outsourcers that are looking to try and promote the location because they've got sites there. What
Mm.
Dave was able to bring to the table, I think, was somebody who does not have a vested interest, somebody who's not there with skin in the game. He's there giving the straight goods from an analyst perspective, but somebody who's been covering CX for a long time, somebody who's had his toes in the CX waters for decades, literally. This is, I think, the type of discussion that we need to have, especially around an emerging spot like Ethiopia. And he had lots of good things to say about it. I think that what's going to come across and what's going to be very clear as we listen to the podcast with Dave today is that when it comes to Ethiopia and potential obstacles, a lot of them are perceived. A lot of it comes around to perception, maybe changing perceptions that people have. But obviously, he's in a much better position to talk about this, having been on the ground than I am, having not visited Ethiopia yet. So I'm going to suggest that we toss the baton to our pal Dave Rickard from Everest Group and find out a little bit more around his insights on Ethiopia and the Elevate Africa conference. We couldn't be happier to welcome back a longtime friend of the podcast, and that is our pal David Rickard, who joins us from the United Kingdom. Dave is with Everest Group. Dave, you are not a first-time guest on the podcast. In fact, you were one of our experts giving us some thoughts about where CX was going to go in 2026, and we recorded that at the end of last year. And great to have you back right off the top. And before we talk about the topic at hand, I'd just like to ask, how do you think 2026 has been going so far?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And yeah, thank you for having me back. It's always nice to be invited back somewhere. I know I didn't mess it up too badly the last time. Um, I say, yeah, I mean, I think 2026 has been another first 3 or 4 months of a lot of hype around AI. I think that we've seen lots of change in the industry with things like Capita selling off for £1, the mergers and acquisitions that are happening. So I think there's still a lot of churn in the industry. I think there's still a lot happening. I think there's a lot of focus and hype around AI, as I was saying. But I also, when I speak to a lot of clients, they're still just trying to get the business done. So yeah, it's not really any different. I'm not a big fan of saying, oh, 26 is different to 25 or will be different in 27, because in reality, every day just merges into one and we're just trying to get
Yeah.
the work done, I think. So it's hard just because we've clicked into another year to suddenly think things are different.
Yeah, it's funny because every time I have a birthday, people will ask me, "How does it feel to be whatever age you've just turned?" I was like, "The same as it did yesterday."
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah,
no big.
exactly. Yeah, I had my birthday 2 weeks ago, and yeah, I don't feel any different than I did 3 weeks ago. I just
Well, happy birthday,
numbers are the thing. Thank you.
happy birthday, and how does it feel to be 29?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm only 28 because one of my birthdays was during
Mm,
COVID. So obviously, I'm only 28. But
okay.
yeah, thank you for noticing.
I think there's a plot from Back to the Future there somewhere, but that's another story for another pod. Well, Dave, listen, we're here to chat a little bit about a trip you made recently, and that was to the Elevate Africa conference that was held in Ethiopia. Now, one of the things that I've always enjoyed about our industry is the fact that the world's not flat. We do have a lot of emerging destinations that are popping up in which CX work can be delivered for key demand markets. Now, as somebody who spent a lot of time early on in their career, visiting some of these spots that were literally nascent, that were literally just getting off the ground, spots that include back in the day, South Africa was a nascent destination, El Salvador, Nicaragua, just as a couple of examples, even spots more recently like Georgia. It's fascinating for me to see that Ethiopia is now coming to the forefront. So, from the perspective of a market analyst, from the perspective of somebody who looks at the market as impartially as possible, and let's be frank, Dave, we know that our role as analysts is to try and find holes, is to try and poke the holes and figure out where they need to be filled. What were you looking for in terms of finding more out about Ethiopia? What were your objectives going on this trip?
Yeah, there's a couple of objectives really. So one, if I'm totally honest with you, and maybe being too honest here, I like to go to places I've never been to before,
Hmm.
and it's one of the countries that I've not been to. So no, I'm joking, but it is a little of a competition I have with my son, who's currently learning to be an officer in the Merchant Navy, and he's getting to go to lots of countries I've never been to. So I'm trying to keep up with him. So that was one of the pulls. But if I'm on a serious note, what I would say is that I wanted to go and see it in its reality because I think that we can see a lot of presentations, we can do Zoom calls and Teams calls, and you always get the best and the brightest. And what I like to do when I'm thinking about locations is actually get on the ground and see it, touch it, feel it, because it's not the people you meet in a call center that you're really judging. I like to see, how are people in shops? How are people in bars? What's the quality of the language like? What's the service attitude like? What is the infrastructure really like? Not what you see in a presentation, but what you actually feel. Do you feel safe? And so when I had the opportunity to go to Ethiopia, I thought, A, it's a country I've not been to, so tick that box. But secondly, there is a lot of hype around Africa. We've done reports on it here at Everest Group, looking at the perception is changing, and we know that obviously South Africa and North Africa have been popular for a while, but that sort of sub-Saharan region is growing in attention. And so it was a great opportunity to get on the ground, see what it's like, hear the people who are actually talking in general everyday life, and get a sense of what the country's like. So that's why I made the effort to go, really, is to get the sense of what it's really like there.
So thinking a little bit about some of the key strengths that you picked up on when you were in Ethiopia. Obviously, as you say, it's great to get on the ground and be able to meet the agents to see what the centers are like, to get a sense of the vibe. And I've heard a lot of really good things about Ethiopia. What do you see as the key selling points for the country in today's CX dynamic? And are there any specific niches that come to mind that Ethiopia might be able to fill well?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about Ethiopia, we originally went, and I did a little bit of research before I went in terms of how we perceived Ethiopia, and historically it's been seen more of a tech hub, but relatively small, but more of a tech location. So now there are people looking to drive CX there. I think one of the niches probably is that ability to provide more tech talent to the industry, and we know that the requirements for tech talent is going to be increasing over time in the CX space. So I think that the niche could potentially be that there is tech and a tech aptitude there. There's government sponsorship there from a tech perspective, and there are tech companies there. So you can get that tech talent into your call centers, which is going to be needed not only at a management level and at a technical support team level, but even at an agent level, having that digital affinity and being comfortable using digital tools and AI. And it seems to be quite pervasive across the whole of Ethiopia. I think the other thing, if we're just going back to old school thinking, though, is that it's also the 10th most populous country in the world, and it's got 138 million people, and the average age is, or the median age is around 20, and 70% of the population is under 30. So when you think about it purely from a demographics perspective, it's got a lot of people who could also work in the call center industry, which we'll get onto in a minute, I'm sure, about whether that's going to be needed in the future as we think about where talent's going. But if you think about pure numbers now, if you've got that many people of the age group that are going to be working in call centers, it's a location who also speak English, then it's a location not to be ignored, really. So that's sort of some of the benefits, I think. It's the pervasiveness of English, it's a lot of people, and there is also an appetite towards tech.
It's a really interesting one because when we talk about the volume of young people, when we talk about the interest and the enthusiasm that young people have in regards to potentially working in CX and having exposure to consumers in different parts of the world, alongside the tech ecosystem that you've got in Ethiopia, it reminds me of a very nascent country from about 20 years ago called Egypt. Very highly populous. One main city, although there are a few satellite cities that potentially work could be done. And look at where Egypt is now. Dave, in all honesty, is Ethiopia potentially the next Egypt? Is this Egypt 2.0 in the making?
It could be. I mean, I think there's more competition for Ethiopia than there was maybe for Egypt. I think
Agreed.
and also the multilingual capabilities that we got from Egypt when I was on the buyer side, we had done Italian and Spanish and French from Egypt as well. And I think that maybe it's harder to get those languages in somewhere like Ethiopia. And I think that if we think about Ethiopia, there's also competition from Kenya and Ghana and Rwanda. So there's probably a little bit more competition, but it's definitely got enough people to do it. And with all the sort of the talent being focused around digital, then actually they've got the right skills potentially as well. It's just whether they're able to get the right infrastructure, the right government support, and also the right providers who also can grow that business as well. Plus, it's also coming into the point where there's always the debate around how many people will we actually need in the future, right? And I think you and I have talked before. I'm not one of those people who thinks the call center industry will be completely wiped out, but there is always questions around how many people will we need in the future. So that's also going to be a challenge, I think, for any market that's becoming established.
Yeah. So let me ask you then to flip the equation over from your perspective, again, as a market analyst, Dave, what do you see as the key challenges Ethiopia is going to have in regards to winning interest, not just winning business, but even getting the interest from some of the key demand markets? What are the obstacles that the country could have in this regard? You talked about competition, but there's got to be more.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges that any new market faces is there's a relatively small pool of providers right now that are
Hmm.
in Ethiopia, and obviously a lot of the time you may get pulled as a buyer, you may get pulled into a market by your existing provider. So if the pool of providers is relatively small, then it's going to be harder to attract people there. I think that when we think about it as well, when I talk to buyers, the problem that Ethiopia faces is that people don't think about the perception as it is now, but they think about the historical side of Ethiopia and the famines that have sort of been there in the past that made all of the news with Band-Aid, etc. And a
Hmm.
lot of buyers. I mean, I remember you mentioned South Africa earlier. I remember 15, 20 years ago trying to get some of my US stakeholders interested in South Africa, and it was too big a step for them then. Now look, everyone's in South Africa. So I think it takes a while to overcome the perception. So I think that there's a perception issue in terms of as when you say Ethiopia, people immediately think of historical negative connotations versus where it is. I also think that there's a limited middle management talent pool because the industry is so new, and so therefore you might have a big population, but you're going to have to bring potentially the middle management layer in from somewhere else. It's going to take a while. Or the risk is, as you know, providers will try to fast track good agents through that middle management layer too quick, and you lose good agents, and they're not necessarily ready for middle management. So I think that's sort of some of the biggest challenges, really. It's just the ecosystem hasn't been built yet, and it's going to take a while to develop. And obviously, if you've got a lot of big providers go in there, they naturally bring some of that. If it's growing from smaller providers or from a smaller base, then it takes longer for that to naturally grow. So I think that's going to probably be the biggest challenge. And then, I say, on top of that, the competition that they're facing from other countries in Africa as well.
The perception thing you mentioned really hits home with me. I'll go back to some of the work that I did going into Latin America, 15 years ago when literally Central America was undiscovered country. It was undiscovered territory from a CX perspective. And you would talk to people about, say, Nicaragua, and the first thing they would say is, well, oh, isn't that where the Sandinistas are from? Yeah, it is. Or El Salvador, oh, what about the Contras? Yeah, I mean, these are issues. I remember Colombia was a very hard sell at first in the early 2000s, and all people would remember were the Pablo Escobar stories, etc. But look at these are all powerhouses now. But this is the thing I think with Ethiopia that it can learn from how a lot of these successful destinations have actually been able to make sure that they've been at the forefront of delivery for the past several years because they've attacked these perceptions head on. And this is something that I think that Ethiopia is going to need to do. Find what the perceptions are, address them head on, find relevant success stories and case studies that have happened, and be bold. Look, the reality is that boldness is the key factor for so many offshore delivery destinations. And this is why we're seeing so many success stories and why we've also seen ones that have been a little more tepid just fall to the wayside.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think it is about raising the sort of the perception and raising the awareness, and I think that I say the event that you mentioned was the starting point for that, with a lot of people going there and experiencing Ethiopia for the first time. But as we said, it takes a while to change that perception, right? I mean, I think that it's going to take a while of people moving there, some success stories being publicized, but it can grow, and it just has to be about how you change the perception that buyers may have from, again, very outdated 20 years, 30 years ago.
Okay, I'm going to throw myself into the shoes of a potential client, somebody that you're advising. So I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, I'm an outsourcer or I'm a client working with an outsourcer and I'm thinking about Ethiopia. What are the key pieces of wisdom? What are the key nuggets of wisdom that you would provide to them prior to them making a decision?
Yeah, I think the one for me that and the one that we're spending quite a lot of time advising clients on right now isn't necessarily where you go today, but what I would be advising clients to think about is think about what talent you're going to need in the future. So that goes back to the conversation we're having about sort of where the demand is going. And we know that humans are going to still be really important in the ecosystem for customer experience in the next 10 years. But the talents that you might need from your resources are going to be different in 3 years' time than they are now. So my advice would be don't jump unless you've got a real urgent need. And there might be better places to go if you have an urgent need for resources tomorrow. But if you're thinking about it as part of your long-term strategy, be very clear about the talent that you're going to need. What skills are they going to need to bring? What work are they going to be doing? And then take a look at any country, and it's not just about Ethiopia, but any country you're assessing to say, okay, is that country going to have the talent I need? Because if I need them to have a particular skill set that might be different for other businesses, depending on whether I come from banking to travel to retail, then is that location going to have the talent I need to be able to be successful in the future? So thinking about it more future-proofing versus thinking about what the immediate is now. I would say also the other things from a tactical perspective is to get out there, see it for yourself, meet the providers you're going to work with, see the talent on the ground to see how that aligns. And it'll also, as you and I have been doing this a long time, a lot of it will come down to the provider that you're going to be working with. If you're looking to outsource, it's not always the location, it's also the provider you're working with. But because I do think that there is an opportunity for the industry as we think a couple of years down the line, that you can pay more for really high quality talent who want to work in this industry, who are really high quality, but if they actually just come from a lower cost market, you can afford to get that much better talent. I think there's always debates around, oh, we need high quality talent, we'll just go onshore. That might not be the right strategy. You could get really high quality talent offshore. They're much higher quality than you're going to get for a reasonable rate onshore, but you can afford to pay for them because even their high cost in that market is a lot lower than an onshore resource. So I think it's about every business is going to be different, but you have to think about what resources you're going to need, what quality they're going to need to be, and then where's the best sources of that talent that also give you an opportunity to balance the books.
Just talking about the talent very quickly, Dave, that actually raised a question as you were chatting there. How did you find the talent on the ground when it came to, say, the alignment that they would have with consumers in Western Europe or North America? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely there's a culture of service, and so it felt like they would naturally align to working for brands and being able to deliver a good service. I think that you'd have to test that more. I would say that the quality of English was good. It probably wasn't as good as other locations I've been to in Africa, in terms of such as Kenya, where I was a couple of years ago. I think the quality of English there was probably a little bit better than it was in widespread Ethiopia. I would say that all of the people I met from an agent perspective, they were all very good. But when you just listen to people in the shops or in the hotel bar, I think the quality probably in other countries was slightly better. Doesn't mean it won't get there. And I also think that if you're picking talent, then you pick the ones who have got that capability. But definitely culturally, from a service perspective and a willingness to serve, and also then adopting digital and being really au fait with all the digital technologies, it seemed to have it. It was a 2-day visit. I didn't get to do in-depth research, but from a sense of feeling, I think they've got the core fundamentals. You just have to put them in the right order. I think I did a LinkedIn post recently and said they've got the right ingredients. You can have the right ingredients and still make a dreadful meal, right? You just got to put the ingredients in the right order, with the right combination.
I've actually got to remember that one about the ingredients for the meals, and heaven knows that I am probably making a lot of very bad meals. Maybe that's my problem. I'm putting the ingredients in at the wrong time. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, thank you very much. This has been very enlightening, and we really appreciate you also giving, I think, a dose of impartiality and reality to what's going on. As you mentioned, there has been a lot of discussion and a lot of hype around emerging Africa. It's great that the region is starting to really showcase itself. It's been around, it's had stops and starts over the course of the past 20 years or so, but now we're seeing some real momentum. And the availability that you made of yourself to visit Ethiopia and to share your views is greatly appreciated. So thanks again.
No worries. Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm always happy to share. We're in this together as an industry. And so it's important that we're getting impartial views that people can trust, right? And hopefully that we can be one of those voices.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.